that kind of stuff. Uh,
Cool. Perfect. Perfect. That
anyway,
sounds good.
I'll just start off. Hello, I'm Shaurya Thapa of Borrowing Tape, and today I'm talking to Adam J. Graves, who is the director of the short film Anuja, which recently made to the Oscars shortlist for Best Live Action Short. So, first of all, congratulations, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me, Shari. I really appreciate it.
So, Adam, Anuja is, if I may put it simply, it's not an easy film to watch because it's set in India. It revolves around two young sisters who work as child laborers in a factory. So what drove you to a story like this, a story that's so grounded in reality?
Well, I take umbrage with that comment, actually. I hope it's not a hard film to watch. It's a hard, definitely the topic is a difficult, challenging topic of child labor, but at the heart of the film is really this relationship between two sisters and it's a, the soul of the picture is the relationship between these two sisters within the context of Anuja's coming of age. And the thought that I had in making the film was, we were developing, I was developing an idea for a coming of age story, kind of like in the vein of some of my favorite coming of age films, like Truffaut's 400 Blows or the first film in the Apu trilogy by Satyajit Ray, or even things like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which was a huge film for me as a kid, or Stand By Me, which is like one of my all-time favorite films ever. What occurred to me is that a lot of the coming of age films that I see coming out today, deal with kids in fairly affluent contexts. And my wife and I came across this statistic while researching her own family's history of indentured labor. That's another story, a long story. But we came across this statistic that one out of 10 kids globally is engaged in child labor. Like 160 million kids around the world are working as opposed to going to school. And it just occurred to me that, that's one out of every 10 kids, but definitely one out of every 10 coming of age stories is not focused on a child who's engaged, who like lives in that world. And so, the way that I see it is it's a coming of age story that just happens to be set within the context of child labor. And I in researching the project, I did a number of site visits with nonprofit organizations to get to know kids who come from this background. And the first thing that struck me was just how unbelievably um, uh, playful and joyful these kids were, and the fact that they were able to kind of find joy and create magic within otherwise really difficult circumstances was something that I felt was inspiring and that I wanted to pay tribute to in the film. So the film, although it does have a kind of it's couched within this context of child labor, which is a really difficult topic. I want it to kind of I was hoping that it would actually be something that really inspires audiences in the same way that you would be inspired when you watch any coming of age film, and that would kind of pay tribute to the magic and the mischievousness of these kids.
And Anuja was, as you said, you said you did a research, but it was based on what I read. Anuja was made in collaboration with the NGO Salam Bank Trust, which supports street children and working children in India. And the lead actress in the film, Sajda Pathan, is also one such child that you got in touch with through the NGO. And tell me a bit about working with Sajda, considering this might have been a first acting role.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't even take credit for having um discovered her as
Yeah.
an actress. She was living about 8 months before we shot. She was living on the streets of like the Paganj and begging, and she encountered a social worker for the Salam Balik Trust. And this is an incredible organization that basically provides food and education to street children in Delhi. And they they have these centers set up throughout the city where kids can come in and kind of play games and engage in informal education. And Sazda encountered a social worker who brought her to one of these centers to have to play games, and she wound up engaging in some acting games that someone there by the name of Pankaj Gupta was organizing. And um, and Pankaj just noticed that she was just a natural talent, like immediately noticed that she had this gift for acting. And roughly maybe 6 months before we shot our film, there was a French filmmaker by the name of Laetitia Colombi who was filming a feature, a French production called The Braid, and was looking for a child to play the daughter of a main character of that film. And so Pankaj put forward Sazda, so asked Sazda, "Hey, would you like to try out for a film?" And she's like, "Well, let's try it." So the irony is that although Sazda was living on the streets in a context that's very similar to the character in our own film, she's living on the streets with no one but her older sister to take care of her, and she actually ironically had probably more days on set than I did as a director when we made Anuja. So, but yeah, she's an incredible person, and all of her life experience just really came through when the camera was rolling. She would do things spontaneously that weren't in the script, that she wasn't prompted to do, but that she was clearly drawing from her own life experience. And yeah, and I can talk endlessly about how her spunkiness comes through in the film, and but I think people who watch it see it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, she seemed like a natural. Like, she was great. Her performance in the film. But I was also thinking, and considering how you said, like, she had to draw. She like for the performance, she drew on her own real life experiences. So, as a filmmaker, and considering that you are far removed from her life story, so as a filmmaker, how did you ensure that you're not, exploiting her story or stories of other children like her?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great question. Well, I think making a film is such an incredible privilege. So few people get the opportunity to make a film or have the resources to make a film. So when, if my feeling is that if you're so lucky as to be able to make a film, why not use that incredible privilege as a way of shedding light on an important issue? I'm not saying every work of art has to have some social cause behind it. Of course not. But I think as a human, I do feel some sense of moral obligation to use the whatever artistic gifts or resources I might have to leave the world a better place. And you know, the there's a lot of this. I could talk endlessly about this, but one of the things I'll say is that it's there aren't too many stories about these children. There are too few, right? 160 million kids. There are 160 million stories out there, and I hope many more filmmakers join the effort to tell stories about people who don't have the resources to kind of produce their own films.
Yep.
Um, what I did and so I should say that the film was partly inspired by my wife's family history. She's of South Asian descent, and her family was brought from Uttar Pradesh to Guyana in the late 19th century, early 20th century, as indentured laborers. And so she's a visual artist, and her practice is rooted in a kind of effort to reclaim her own family's history and her own ancestral past, and to kind of work through issues of labor, and to kind of also ensure that the voices of the women who informed her practice, like her grandmothers, are heard. So gender and labor are kind of central to her practice. And we, as a family, have always been conscientious about labor issues. So when we read this statistic that 1 in 10 kids is engaged in labor, we thought, well, we have kids roughly that age of South Asian descent. those kids are, our kids could be those kids, right? And so it felt close. It felt close. The other piece is that child labor is not an issue that's just it's not an issue that's there. It's an issue that's also here. That is to say it's a global issue.
Yeah,
And that I'm even more, we're all kind of as consumers of products that are potentially made with children's hands, we're all implicated, morally implicated in the problem of child labor. And I think we all have a moral obligation to kind of face it and address it and look at it straight on. As a moral philosopher, and my background's in South Asian studies and philosophy, I'm a believer in Kant's claim that we have a moral obligation to look human suffering in the eyes and not to walk around it and avoid it. And so my sense is that I had an obligation to tell this story based on the ancestral history of my own children and my wife's family. In terms of the authenticity of the story told, what we did is we worked with organizations in and around Delhi who cater to the needs of children and working children and formerly working children. So we did research both in terms of scholarly work on child labor in the garment sector in South Asia, but also specifically we read case studies that were uh, like very concrete case studies of children who are now living at places like the Slum Bog Trust, or who are engaged in educational opportunities provided by Save the Children and other organizations. So we really grounded the film in it's not based on a true story, but it's an amalgamation of a variety of experiences and problems that these children have in fact faced. Um, so one of the things that we've discovered that's fairly common across it's really across the globe is that young girls in particular often face the decision between staying at home or staying out of school and working to contribute to the kind of material well-being of their family if they live in abject poverty, or go to school and potentially have the ability to kind of build a better future for themselves. And as a kind of as someone who comes from a wealthier background, I think it's really easy to be condescending and just kind of wave the finger and say, well, of course, go to school. That's the obvious choice. But I don't think in reading case studies and talking to these girls, I don't think that choice is actually that obvious at all. I think it's an existential choice. It's an existential decision that it's really unfortunate these girls have to actually make. They shouldn't have to make this decision, but they're faced with it. And so in developing the script and working with these nonprofits and meeting the children, I basically thought, wouldn't it be like if this film could bring the audience into that world and lead and kind of make them feel that existential
okay,
tension, then I think we've succeeded as filmmakers.
yeah. Because I mean, what you said makes a lot of sense because what I could sense from Anuja as just like as a viewer was that it was trying to be non-judgmental because often what happens is like whenever filmmakers, be it Indian or non-Indian filmmakers, when they set out to make films in a South Asian context of children who are not from particularly affluent backgrounds, you have the risk of directing, if I may use the word, poverty porn. Or just like fetishizing the pain, or just like just the everyday life of a person like Sajda, and then it turns into like a pity party, for the viewer. So for you, like while filming all of this, while filming, because in your film you film in the streets, and you show these everyday struggles, even like the tender moments of happiness that Sajda's character has with her sister as well. But how did you like try to make your lens as unbiased and as non-judgmental as possible? Like you, because there are certain ideas in your mind, but how do you put it in action? How do you execute that?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, through a very conscious and deliberate attempt to avoid those cliches and to avoid kind of bringing that kind of that Western kind of colonialist gaze. And I think part of this comes from I mean, my background in South Asian studies. So I spent a lot of time in India studying Sanskrit and working with different nonprofits over the years. And part of my kind of core study is the kind of literature on post-colonial studies and my wife's artistic practice is kind of rooted also in kind of undoing the kind of colonialist conception of quote unquote the other and trying to kind of recontextualize the past in ways that undo those biases and those prejudices and kind of provide, cast a new light on the work. And the fact is that, my wife, who's kind of not just my producer, but also is my creative partner, because of her own practice in doing that in the sphere of visual arts, it just kind of became absolutely, it was like a core mission of the film itself. So like one of the things that we wanted to avoid, for example, you said poverty porn, and I think the idea is that like, using a child suffering as a cheap and easy way of kind of exploiting the empathy of an audience, uh, casting characters as just, victims of circumstances that deprive them of their own agency. Um, those kinds of frameworks we were very consciously, we knew we had to avoid that. And it was easy because when we were doing the research and we were meeting with these kids, it's obvious that they're not passive victims. They
Yeah,
are, um, they share all of the kind of um, qualities that I love seeing in the protagonists of the coming of age films that kind of, inform my childhood. And like part of that is the fact that the kids are always smarter than the adults. And that's, no offense to the wonderful adults who run these organizations, but man, these kids are just so wicked smart. And there's so much untapped potential and natural gifts there that is easy to kind of
yeah,
construe a story and that's kind of focusing on a child who has natural gifts and both sisters are outsmarting the adults in their lives uh, throughout the film and that to me was kind of essential to kind of capturing these children as agents and in some sense who are trying as best they can to control their own destiny despite the terrible circumstances that they find themselves in. And then you might just say like even smaller technical things like I watch we all see these films that are that are kind of I don't know that have the legacy of a colonialist gaze where you go to India and you shoot and there's this particular light that's always there and it's true there is I mean I'm not gonna lie Delhi has a particular light. The light in Delhi is quite different from the light in Mumbai and the light in Varanasi that each of there is something has I think it has a lot to do with the burn of the agricultural fields, in just kind of directly west of Delhi itself during certain parts of the year. The winds blow, of course, as you know, the particulate matter, and that does create a certain kind of light. But trying to avoid the kind of cliche conception of how this world is supposed to look. And the way that we tried to avoid that was just to make everything completely like to make it as faithful as possible to the spaces, the places, and the people. So we shot on real locations. We didn't dress sets or anything like that, with the exception of the factory. We had to make some changes in the factory because the factory was was a real factory, but it was a jeans factory. They were
Yeah.
making jeans there, and I wanted to make sure that they were making. I just all the jeans are the same navy blue color and kind of boring to look at, and so that was the one artifice I think in terms of the film. But everything else is completely authentic. We have the you might remember there's a procession with dole drummers. That's a that we staged that, but it's a real group of dole drummers who we were in touch with and asked them if they would like to come and be part of the project. And yeah, so the key was just to not we didn't have to recreate the
Yeah.
place and the people. We just captured the truth of what was already there.
All right. Thank you for your time, Adam. That was a pretty insightful conversation. And I hope when the nominations come out, the odds are in your favor. And thank you for making an important film like Anuja. And as an Indian myself, like I was concerned because like when the credits were rolling, when I first watched the film and I hadn't done my research, and I was like, who is this English sounding name filmmaker? Like I hope this is not another fetishization or exotic Indian film. But then I watched it and yeah, I was proven wrong. So I'm glad and thank you for your time, Adam.
Thank you, Shaurya. That really means a lot to me. I really appreciate you saying that.